Dead. After 12 months of war, Israel has killed its most wanted man, Yahya Sinwar. So what now for Gaza and hopes of a ceasefire? Yahya Sinwar, one of the architects of October the 7th attacks, was killed during a military operation in southern Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister has celebrated his death as a victory over evil, while the President and Vice President of the United States says it's a good day for the world.
Justice has been served, and the United States, Israel, and the entire world are better off as a result.
But even with the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah now dead, Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected fresh calls for an end to the conflict.
The good will prevail over the evil, and believe me, the war has not ended yet.
So what happens next in Gaza, in Lebanon, and across the Middle East? Once again, the region is holding its breath. Good evening and welcome to the programme. In the aftermath of the October 7th attacks, Israel promised revenge and prioritised one target above all others, the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar. For 12 months, he evaded capture. That is, until now. The IDF says Sinwar has been killed during an operation near Rafah in southern Gaza. And a warning, we're about to show you a photograph taken after he died. It shows Sinwar's corpse surrounded by IDF troops. After this was taken, fingerprints and DNA records were checked to identify his body. Israel claims his death will lead to a new reality in Gaza. The 61-year-old had led Hamas in Gaza since 2017, after joining its ranks in the 1980s. He spent more than 20 years in prison for killing Israelis and Palestinians suspected of helping Israel. He was released in 2011 as part of a prisoner swap, and Israel believes he went on to mastermind the October 7th attacks, which killed 1,200 people. The big question now, how will it change this conflict? Well, many had hoped this moment might allow Israel to claim victory and agree to a ceasefire. Indeed, the US State Department has said it will now push a ceasefire proposal forwards. Well, tonight, Israel's Prime Minister says he's not ready to end the war. So the big question, what happens next? And before we hear more from the Israeli Prime Minister, let's go live now to Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, who has the very latest on the developments following Sinwar's death.
Area using a drone, you can see it here, him here. Yahya Sinwar got injured. In his hand, you can see his face is covered. In his final moments, he threw a wooden beam toward the drone. We identified him as a terrorist.
Well, as you can see, Daniel Hagari holding that press conference, showing some quite graphic images. So we're not going to show you those images, but we did show you a little earlier that image of Yahya Sinwar in the moments that we understand that he was killed by the IDF. Let's go straight to our Alistair Bunkle, who joins me now from Jerusalem. And Ali, we're just listening there to Daniel Hagari, who is giving us more details following the killing of Yahya Sinwar. But this is a massive moment for the Israelis, a year on from October the 7th.
Yeah, huge moment, a moment of justice for Israelis. Yahya Sinwar was the mastermind, the architect behind the October the 7th massacre, and Israel and the Israeli Defense Forces had been hunting him for the last 12 and a bit months. It had been unsuccessful. They believe he had evaded capture on a number of occasions. They believed that they'd come close to finding him, but to no avail. And then yesterday, in a battle in southern Gaza, in the city of Rafah, they eventually managed to kill Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. They have removed the figurehead, the man who was behind those October the 7th attacks. But it raises a lot of questions about what comes next. Who will lead Hamas in his place? What does it mean for the future of the war in Gaza? What does it mean for the hostages who remain there and their fate?
Yeah, absolutely, Ali. We're just going to go back to Daniel Hagari. We had some graphic images that he was showing of the moment that they found and killed Yahya Sinwar. They're off those images now, so we're going to go back to that news conference.
Of the State of Israel. I will now take questions and then say a few more words in English. Questions. Ilan Cohen, Channel 12 News. Do we know what the condition of the hostages are? And can we identify any changes in the Hamas organization? We will continue to do everything we can to create the conditions for returning the hostages swiftly as possible. We continue to collect intelligence with great efforts, ISA and the IDF Intelligence Corps, in order to find out the situation and condition of the hostages, and we will continue to do that. Khan 11 and Khan Rashid. Is there any information the IDF has on Muhammad Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar's brother, and is he now the #1 wanted person in the Gaza Strip? We are monitoring all Hamas terrorists, wherever they are. Of course, the military commanders, among them Muhammad Sinwar, that you've mentioned, we are monitoring them. We have been monitoring them since the beginning of the war. We will continue to do that. And as we have proven, the IDF and ISA, we have come full circle. We have closed in on Yahya Sinwar, and on Muhammad F. And we will continue this effort. We will continue the effort to come full circle and close in on anyone who has blood on their hands and is responsible and has taken part in October 7th. Ynet and Yediot Achronot. Do we know why Yahya Sinwar came up above ground? From what I understand and from what I saw on the ground, is that Sinwar apparently was there in the area, in this underground complex. As we found his DNA several meters away from the tunnel where the 6 hostages were killed, he was in this area, and forces have been in this area for a while, have been closing in on it, and I believe he was trying to flee. He was running from one underground area to another, to houses, and he was trying to run away northwards to areas that are more safe. And we continued with determination, without knowing he was there, without knowing exactly where he was at. We continued to be determined to take action in those areas. The Southern Command, at the beginning it was the Brigade 952, then it was the Gaza one. We continued to be determined to make sure the terrorists do not run away from this area, that we're not missing anything in this area. And this effort proved itself. We have seen it happen on the ground. He was running from one house to the next. He was fleeing. We saw him as a terrorist. We closed in on him professionally and we took him out. Now that Sinwar has been taken out, what is the next main mission of the IDF in Gaza? How does it serve the war goals? How does it promote the return of the hostages? And also, after the event of the incident of the 6 hostages having been killed, have any of the lessons been concluded, been drawn? Let me go back, because part of your question, because you have several parts to your question. The aims and goals of the war that the IDF has been handed down from the government are clear. First of all, it's destroying the military arm of Hamas, and we are taking steps to do that, of course, to destroy. And the killing of Sinwar is a huge achievement en route to achieving this goal, but there are still other commanders, there are still activists, and we will continue with this mission. Alongside this mission, we have another very clear goal, and that is to create the conditions in order to return the hostages home as quickly as possible. And this mission is a key goal. Of course, a great accomplishment such as taking out Sinwar serves this purpose too, and we need to see it translated into actions. As for the other missions, which is returning the northern residents and southern residents of Israel safely to their homes, we continue to take actions in this area too. In this day, on ground actions, on operations in both southern Lebanon, the Gaza Strip, and Judea and Samaria in order to ensure Israeli residents' safety. We want you to know that the IDF is deployed with warriors, with brigades, with reservists, and they are all very dedicated right now on all fronts. And there are accomplishments. There are also heavy prices that we've paid. As I've mentioned, we will continue to achieve these goals and to promote these goals so that we can, as quickly as possible, have Israeli residents return to their homes, have the hostages return to their homes as quickly as possible, and we'll continue to take action against our enemies. Radio South, as for the general's plan, the island plan, now that the Sinwar has been taken out, is it going to be implemented in order to return the hostages and to destroy Hamas? This matter of the general's plan is semantics. It's a wrong semantics. It's actually a mistake. We're not using any general's plan. We have our own military plans, IDF plans. They have nothing to do with any other plan that you have mentioned. We have our plans, and we are taking action in Gaza according to military plans. Of course, these are plans that combine the international law and everything required, and we are taking actions this way. And we in Jabalia right now are destroying Hamas infrastructure. We're not allowing Hamas to recover in Jabalia. This is where we're focused. We're going to continue to do that in an organized fashion according to military plans. We're not going to let go in order to achieve the military goals, and we'll continue to take such action as we have been doing according and under international law. We are committed to it, and we'll continue to do that with all the efforts. As the political echelon has already told us, we've also been guided to make sure there's humanitarian conditions in place. We continue to bring supplies into Gaza according to the political echelon's directives. We've continued to do that since the beginning of the war. I will now move on to a few words in English.
Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas terrorist organization, who was responsible for the October 7th massacre, is dead. Sinwar was responsible for the most brutal attack against Israel in our history, when terrorists from Gaza invaded Israel, massacred Israelis in their homes, raped our women, burned entire families alive, and took over 250 men, women, children, and babies hostage into Gaza. 101 hostages still remain in captivity in brutal conditions. For the past year, Sinwar tried to escape justice. He failed. We said we would find him and bring him to justice, and we did it. It was Yahya Sinwar who decided to wage war with Israel while hiding behind civilians in Gaza. Since the beginning of this war that Sinwar started on October 7th, we've said our war is with Hamas, not with the people of Gaza. And we mean it. We are working to increase the amount of humanitarian aid, including food, water, and medicine that goes into Gaza, to the people of Gaza who are suffering because of Yahya Sinwar. On this day, our thoughts are with the families of those murdered or kidnapped because of Sinwar. We bow our hearts, heads, and remember, we bow our heads and remember our brave soldiers who paid their ultimate sacrifice to defend the people of Israel. Our work is not done. We will not rest until we bring home all our hostages by any means. And we will continue to operate until we complete all our missions in defense of the people of Israel. Thank you.
You were listening there to Daniel Hagari, IDF spokesperson, talking there about the killing of Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, the man that they have been searching for the last 12 months, believed to be the mastermind of October the 7th. And of course, the United States has responded to the killing of Yahya Sinwar. President Biden has said this is justice. Kamala Harris has also spoken, and she said that this is now a moment to bring the war in Gaza to an end. You're looking at the latest pictures of the US President Joe Biden, who has just arrived in Berlin to meet with his counterparts. And this really is a farewell trip as well for Joe Biden, who is coming to meet his colleagues, counterparts in the Germany there. But you're looking at live pictures. Of course, he seems to be speaking to the press there on the tarmac, no doubt reacting and responding to what has happened today in the war in Gaza as well. Well, let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who is with us at the moment. I understand we do have... no, we don't have Alistair Bunkle. We will be going to him in a moment. Let's just have a look at his piece.
Yahya Sinwar was Israel's most wanted man. He was the leader of Hamas and the mastermind of the October the 7th attacks on Israel. His death is a major moment in the year-long war. Israel's prime minister confirmed the news.
The person who committed the most terrible massacre in the history of our nation since the Holocaust, the mass murderer who murdered thousands of Israelis and kidnapped hundreds of our citizens, was eliminated today by our heroic soldiers. And today, as we promised to do, we came to account with him. Today, evil has suffered a heavy blow, but the task before us is not yet complete.
After more than a year hunting for him, the Israelis eventually found Sinwar in Tel al-Sultan in western Rafah. His body was lying in the ruins of a building surrounded by Israeli soldiers. We went into the neighborhood last month on an IDF embed. It had been totally flattened by weeks of bombardment and fighting. But there were ongoing battles nearby, although there was no hint that Sinwar might be close. The IDF believed they came close to finding him on a number of occasions in the past year, but each time he escaped. Sinwar spent 20 years in an Israeli jail but was released in 2011 as part of a deal returning the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. He learnt fluent Hebrew in prison to communicate with his jailers and to get into the mind of his enemy. Back in Gaza, he went on to become the leader of Hamas in the Strip. He was popular among many Palestinians for leading the resistance against Israel. In 2021, after a short war with Israel, he was photographed sitting on an armchair in the rubble of a building. It was seen in Gaza and around the Middle East as a picture of defiance and victory. In the end, he was killed above ground, not in a tunnel, and wearing combat fatigues. For many Palestinians, this will be an image of a leader who died fighting the Israelis.
Sinwar's assassination is not different to the assassinations of other Palestinian leaders over the years, and is not different to the martyrdom of more than 44,000 Palestinians in Gaza. May he rest in peace.
I don't think the war's going to end after his assassination. If anything, it's only going to get worse and more difficult. Who's going to negotiate for us now? It was Sinwar. Who's going to replace him? There are no replacements.
After the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last July, Sinwar was appointed the overall leader of the group. It was his decision whether Hamas agreed to a ceasefire and a release of the hostages or not.
Hamas is decimated and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza.
Today, even as the identification of Sinwar's body was underway, Israel bombed the Jabalia camp in northern Gaza. The IDF claimed they killed Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters. Children were also among the dead, though. The killing of Yahya Sinwar is a significant moment in Israel's war against Hamas. But Hamas was and is more than one man. The war in Gaza is not over. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
And we're going to have some more analysis on the killing of Yahya Sinwar, but I'm just going to bring you some breaking news. The Prime Minister Keir Starmer has made a statement following the death of the leader of Hamas. He said, as the leader of the terrorist group Hamas, Yahya Sinwar was the mastermind behind the deadliest day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, as 1,200 people were slaughtered in Israel. Today, my thoughts are with the families of those victims. The UK will not mourn his death. The release of all hostages, an immediate ceasefire and an increase in humanitarian aid are long overdue so we can move towards a long-term sustainable peace in the Middle East. So a statement there from Keir Starmer, very much in line with what we heard from the Vice President Kamala Harris, who said that the leadership of Hamas is now eliminated. Hamas has been decimated. It is now time to bring the war in Gaza to an end. And that really is what Western leaders are focusing on at the moment. We will be putting all of those to a spokesperson of the Israeli government in a moment. But with Israel's most wanted now dead, what is left of Hamas and Hezbollah, and what could this blow to their authority mean for the possibility of peace in Gaza and in Lebanon? Here's our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn.
Among the relatives of Israel's hostages and their supporters, there was no jubilation. The man who masterminded the capture of so many Israelis last October may now be dead, but the reaction here wasn't perhaps what you might expect.
I'm even more scared now that we won't get anybody back.
Why is that?
Because they have no reason, and revenge.
Zahira Shahar Moore's uncle died in Gaza. Abraham Munder's body returned 2 months ago. His nephew worries Sinwar's death may only make matters worse.
I'm not shedding any tear for the death of this murderous monster, but of course now in this situation, the situation is even more precarious for the hostages right now than it was 2 days ago, because now there's no central leadership, there's no one to safeguard the hostages. So every leader on the field can decide and this is very dangerous, very dangerous.
Whatever the anxieties people have here that the death of Sinwar could complicate efforts to bring home the hostages, what is undeniable is that one of Israel's key war aims, decapitating Hamas, has now been achieved. And the hope is that could bring forward the day when this conflict can be brought to an end. 4 Hamas commanders have now been targeted by Israel this year. Deputy Chief Salah al-Aruri killed in a drone strike in Beirut in January. Mohammed Deif also planned the October 7th attacks, killed in Khan Yunis, say the Israelis, although that is disputed by Hamas. And Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh, assassinated in July in the Iranian capital Tehran. But Yahya Sinwar, last seen in the tunnels under Gaza in February, was Israel's most elusive and formidable enemy. A strategic mastermind who understood and tormented the Israeli psyche like no other. It is a massive loss for Hamas.
Israel has been assassinating iconic Palestinian figures for 40, 50 years, yet Hamas has been able to rebuild its ranks and file. I take it for now, in the short term and midterm, this will be really devastating. But at the end of the day, the guerrilla warfare against Israel, both in Gaza and the West Bank, will go on.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has promised total victory over Hamas and will now be tempted to press home the advantage and double down in Gaza. But he will also be under huge pressure, no doubt, from America and others to seize the moment and do a deal, to release the hostages and start winding up this war. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Tel Aviv.
Well, let's stick with that question of what happens next. For 12 months, I've been told that Israel needs to be given an off-ramp to pull away from the war in Gaza. But will Sinwar's death be that off-ramp? Well, we saw with the assassination of Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah that it did not bring an end to the bloodshed in Lebanon. Israel have continued to target the 2 top branches of the group's leadership structure in a series of airstrikes over the last few months. Like Nasrallah, could Sinwar's death simply be a precursor to even more violence in Gaza? Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined now by Israeli government spokesperson David Mencer. Mr. Mencer, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Kamala Harris this evening spoke about the killing of Yahya Sinwar. She said the leadership of Hamas has been eliminated. Hamas has been decimated. It is now time for the war in Gaza to come to an end. Is this what the Israeli government is going to do next?
Well, certainly the death of this dastardly terrorist Jew killer is a positive development. Our forces found him and gave him some justice. So it's certainly a victory in the fight against terrorism. But our mission is not over, Yalda. While this is a significant achievement, the mission is ongoing. We've got a continued commitment. We need to bring back all of our hostages.
And is it not, Mr. Mercer, is it not then the way to go down this path, given that you have now decapitated the leadership of Hamas, you have weakened them significantly? I mean, Kamala Harris is saying, they've been decimated. Is it now not the time to go back to the negotiating table and work on a ceasefire so that you can get those hostages home?
The Prime Minister this evening, Yalda, could not have been clearer. He said that the Hamas members have been warned very clearly from today's action that their leadership is fleeing and that they too will be targeted. But he gave them a chance I've never yet heard from our Prime Minister, from his own mouth. He said it very, very clearly that if they return our hostages unharmed, they will be able to escape the region with their lives. Now, that is our offer to the terrorists. Set our people free, let them go and escape with your life. Otherwise...
So who are you talking to now to ensure that that happens? Because, the Qatari Prime Minister, for example, and the Qataris have been part of this negotiating deal of a ceasefire over the course of the last year, say that for the last few months there has been next to no talk around this ceasefire. Have you decided now to go back to the drawing board and talk about these, make these offers so that you can get the hostages home, so that you can bring an end to the conflict in Gaza?
So that is incorrect. The negotiations have been ongoing. We've been sending our negotiators in good faith to try and get
I mean, he said this just yesterday. The Qatari Prime Minister said that there's been next to no, talk around anything of substance.
So, Yalda, you have to remember that it is Hamas that has refused to implement a deal or to come to any sort of agreement. And the Americans have made that clear, the Qataris have made that clear, the Egyptians have made that clear.
The Americans have also, and I've interviewed the US, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, who has said, and the US President has also said, that the Prime Minister has, constantly put a spanner in the works. But just in terms of this moment and what Israel can actually do to bring the hostages home, are you now looking at a ceasefire deal rather than perpetual war?
Yalda, the Prime Minister has made a crystal clear announcement to the people holding our hostages. He firstly said that they are our highest priority. They're an open wound in Israeli society. All of us know their names. They need to be brought home right now. 101 people, 13 of them are children, 13 of them are women, 2 children. I can't get those 2 redhead Bibas boys out of my mind. They're the same age as my own kids. But he said something extremely significant. And if Hamas terrorists are watching Sky, then they should know that the Prime Minister has said, set our hostages free, lay down your arms, and you will be able to escape with your life. Now, to be clear, this was the same offer which was made by our hostage coordinator, Brigadier General Gal Hirsch. But like all the great Jew haters in history, like Adolf Hitler, when they're given an off-ramp, they don't take it because they're Jew haters.
Mr. Mercer, I mean, you keep saying this, but is there a point in which, a deal will be struck now and you will take these negotiations more seriously so that the conflict can come to an end as well?
So, Yalda, it's an outrage that you say that we don't take these negotiations seriously. We have made generous offers. Secretary of State Blinken has made that clear. Everyone has said that it's Hamas that walks away every single time. It is Hamas that is holding the hostages. and we have taken apart their leadership one by one by one. But if they let our people go now, lay down their arms, they will escape with their lives.
We've also been in a position, Mr.
Clearer than
Mercer,
that.
for the last year where there have been more hostages killed, in an attempt to get them out militarily rather than go to through a diplomatic route. More hostages have died as a result of that rather than getting them out alive.
So, Yalda, it does seem to me that you are very faithfully representing the talking points of Hamas. Just to be clear,
Mr. Mercer, I have spent the last year talking to different Israeli officials about this issue. This is not Hamas's talking points. I've spoken to American officials, your allies, your partners, including Israeli officials, including being in Israel on October the 7th to mark the one-year anniversary. So this is not Hamas's talking points. This is about talking about your objectives, and your objectives include bringing the hostages back home, and your objectives based on what your allies are saying. Just yesterday, we saw at the United Nations the US representative saying that Israel needed to provide proof that they didn't have a policy of starvation in Gaza. They are calling for this war to come to an end. They're calling for the hostages to be brought back home. But obviously, just the military route is not the route that is working. So are you going to go back to the negotiating table? That is the question that I'm asking.
So if I can get a word in edgeways, Yalda, before you interrupt me again. Number one, my name is David Mencer, M-E-N-C-E-R. Okay, you've got my name 3 times wrong now. Secondly, the Prime Minister has made the point crystal clear. Set our people go, you escape with your lives. He's also made the point crystal clear this evening that there can be no element of Hamas that remains in any point of authority in the future of Gaza. We want a better future for the people of Gaza and, of course, our people here in Israel, but that cannot include anyone from Hamas. We want Gazans to run their own future, but not Gazans who are intent on destroying our country.
So just briefly, if I can, what does success now look like for you? How does this actually end? Because what we're hearing is, that the Hamas leadership has been decapitated, but what is being said, it does look like perpetual war.
It's certainly not a perpetual war. Our objectives are very, very clear. The Prime Minister laid them out this evening. He said, number one, our highest priority is returning our 101 hostages. 36 of them have unfortunately been murdered, but we want to get the rest of them home. Number two is to ensure that Hamas is not in power in any way to destroy its governing and military capabilities. And of course, to ensure that Gaza can never again be a threat to this country. That is our objectives. We are getting closer all the time, but the mission is not over yet. Today is a significant achievement, but with this mission ongoing, we have a commitment to bring home our people and to dismantle this Hamas organization, and that is precisely what we will do, whether you, Yalda, like it or not.
David Mencer, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Now let's bring you some breaking news that's just come in to our studio. Liam Payne's One Direction bandmates have said they are completely devastated by the news of his death. In a statement signed by the members of One Direction, the bandmates, they said, and I'm just going to read you that statement, if I can have a look at the statement. Yeah. We're completely devastated by the news of Liam's passing in time, and when everyone is able to, there will be more to say. But for now, we will take some time to grieve and process the loss of our brother, who we loved dearly. The memories we shared with him will be treasured forever. For now, our thoughts are with his family, his friends, and the fans who loved him alongside us. And we'll have much more on the death of Liam Payne in a moment. Now I'll speak to an Israeli intelligence officer who interrogated Yahya Sinwar while he was in prison. So do stay with us. We've got lots more coming up.
we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back to the programme. Returning to the killing of the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, Israel's most wanted man. Well, I'm joined now by Michael Kubi, a former official with Israel's Shin Bet security agency who personally interrogated Sinwar. Thank you very much, Mr. Kubi, for joining us here on the programme. You have actually said that you know Yahya Sinwar and his mind, his mentality. You knew him better than perhaps his family members, his mother and father. I just want you to help us understand the mindset of this man.
That's right. I interrogated with Yahya Sinwar more than 180 hours, during my serving as the head of the interrogators in Gaza in 1989. I remember we entered to my room and he said immediately, I don't want to speak with you. I want to be Shaheed. I told him, look, you wouldn't be Shaheed now until you'll tell me all the story of the Hamas, what you have done in the Hamas and everything. So he said that he don't want to speak with me. I took him immediately to the room of Ahmad Yassin, his leader, and his leader gave him a fatwa to speak everything that he know about the Hamas and what he did against the Israelis. And after he told him the fatwa, he said, Ahmad Yassin, he had, and he said, don't be angry, you will be released after a few years because we are going to continue kidnapping. I took him immediately to my room and I started interrogating with him. He cooperated with me and he gave me all the details about what he did at the Hamas. How, and he described to me how he killed one by one 12 Palestinian innocents that he suspects that they were cooperating with us. And
yes,
they
Kubi,
didn't.
I mean, he had the nickname the Butcher of Khan Yunis because of the number of Palestinians he
The
killed.
nickname is coming from Gaza citizens, not from the Israelis, because they knew him as a cruel man. The people of Gaza, the citizens of Gaza, they give him the name the Butcher from Khan Yunis. And they told them, because he cut the head of each of the men that he murdered. He was so cruel, not only with the Jews, because his dream was to kill many, many Jews in all the state of Israel, and then the infidels. And I'm really glad that he was dead today, that he dead today. It's not, I'm not, it's in the Israelis, we are not glad when somebody, even it's our enemy, dead. But when he dead, I'm really glad because he was very dangerous to the whole world. He promised after he will kill the Israelis, he will kill the infidels.
Mr. Kubi, did you think that when you were interrogating him and when you saw he was freed from an Israeli prison and he went back into Gaza, did you ever think that he was capable of what we saw unfold on October the 7th?
Look, of course, when he gave me all the details about the Hamas, about the plan of the Hamas, and how he trained his units, not only he, the other officers like Ahmad Yassin, Salah Shahada, and the others, he told me exactly what they planned to do at 89. We were lucky when we arrested him, that group, all the 520 members of the Hamas. That was all the Hamas that time. They told me, all of them, not only Yahya Sinwar, what was the plan, what they want to do in the Israeli kibbutzim, Israeli settlement. They told me exactly what they did at 7 October 23.
Yeah, and I guess, when we look at what happened after October 7th, what do you think that Yahya Sinwar was thinking when the war broke out in Gaza. We saw the death toll rise. Thousands of people have now been killed. What do you think he was thinking?
You know, I'm going to tell you, I gave a lot of interviews to Israeli channels, and I told them every interview that Yahya Sinwar don't want any kind of negotiation with the Israelis or about the hostages, because he don't want to release the hostages. He preferred them to be dead. That's what Yahya Sinwar taught all the time. We didn't have any kind of negotiation with him. We tried to make negotiation with Qatar, with Egypt, and with the American, not with him. He never agreed to release hostages. You have to know. You know, the first group of hostages that was released, it's only because he saw that they were killed by the people that, you know, caged them, the people that took them to Gaza Strip. Until he's dead, he didn't know exactly where are all the hostages, because each of them are in tunnels and the other groups are in homes in Gaza.
And are you surprised at the way that he was killed above ground? Because up until now, for the last year, we've believed that he's been in these tunnels.
Okay. I wasn't surprised. I knew that he's going to be killed. It's not now more than, you know, even a year. I was waiting for his killing. I really was waiting for his killing. I knew that he's going to be killed. That time he was killed without any kind of intelligence that we know that he's there. You know, it was a group of Israeli soldiers that were fighting in Tel Sultan in Rafah, and they did their work for killing terrorists. In those terrorists was Yahya Sinwar, in that group. It was by, I don't want to say coincidence, they want to kill terrorists. That was their, you know, duty, and they did it. And we found the body. I want you to know that in his pockets we found, you know, ID of a teacher that working in UNRWA. You have to know that. We found 40,000 shekel in his pocket, and except the ID that we found, that he is a teacher in UNRWA. And the ID was with him in the pocket.
Well, we're really grateful, Mr. Kubi, for you joining us here on the program and helping us better understand the mindset.
I just want to add one sentence. I want to say to the whole free world, especially the West world, that we must be united fighting the terrorists. It doesn't matter if it's the Hezbollah or the Hamas or any kind of terrorist. You know, we have to do all together and to be united.
Michael Kubi, thank you very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, hailing the killing of the leader of Hamas, Benjamin Netanyahu said the region now has an opportunity to stop what he called the axis of evil and create a future of peace. But how far does Yahya Sinwar's death go towards creating that future? Well, let's speak now to our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, who joins us from Beirut. Alex, thanks very much for joining us. You know, in the course of the last few weeks, since we saw the war in Lebanon escalate as well, we've continued to hear Benjamin Netanyahu say to the Lebanese people, this is a moment for you to change your future, you know, when it comes to the decapitation of Hezbollah. He said the same thing today to the people of Gaza. He's also continued to say that to the people of Iran as well. But, you know, big questions are being asked about what is likely to happen next now that Yahya Sinwar has been killed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the fundamental question that everybody is sort of scratching around and trying to answer tonight. Yahya Sinwar, of course, is for Israel what Osama bin Laden was for the Americans. His death, of course, in Abbottabad in Pakistan didn't usher in the end of Al-Qaeda. This is not going to be the end of Hamas. It's not going to be the end of the Palestinian conflict. So if you sort of scratch at all the different levels, there are still so many things that are unresolved. You have the crisis in the theatre with Hamas and Israel, the fighting going on there. How will that end? Is this a pathway now for diplomatic negotiations? But you also have the war going on here in Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah has linked that to a ceasefire in Gaza, but I'm not sure the Israelis see it like that anymore, whether or not they want to go back to the status quo of October the 6th and have a heavily armed militant group on their border. They may very well keep using this moment because they have the momentum to keep prosecuting their war so that when it does to come to negotiations, they have a much stronger hand. And then the bigger question in the region is, where does Iran fit into all of this? Is Iran going to curb its behavior, stop funding all of these militant groups around the region that are intent on destroying what they see as the Zionist entity? We don't have any answers to any of those questions. The killing of Yahya Sinwar, though, is a very, very significant moment. I think the hope here from people we've spoken to is that it will lead to a path which can diffuse many of the tensions. Remember, this is a region, Yalda, as you know well, that is on flames. The Americans have been trying to damp down those flames, stop them getting higher, but, you know, it's at exploding point. We still, of course, have the question of the Israeli retaliation to the October the 1st ballistic missile attack as well. What will all that mean? The Iranians are saying there are no red lines, and they will respond to that. Another possible escalation. And then underneath all of this, you have the unresolved Palestinian conflict dating back, of course, to 1948. As Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, who was slammed by the Israelis for saying it, but he said October the 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. Until that question is resolved of how you have an equitable solution to the problems dating back to the creation of the Jewish state, you are going to have these kinds of events happening, whether it's in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years' time. But fundamentally, this conflict is not going to go away until you ultimately resolve the radioactive problem at its core. And there's no suggestion today that anyone is any closer to doing that tonight.
Alex, thank you so much for all of your analysis there from Beirut. Now, while much of our focus today has been on the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, I want to focus now on the escalating humanitarian crisis unfolding in the Middle East. There are fears of famine in Gaza. Many in the West Bank are suffering violence and displacement, while in Lebanon, more than 1 million people have fled their homes. The Disasters Emergency Committee has launched a humanitarian appeal to help respond to the crisis. Well, I'm joined now by the Chief Executive of the DEC, Salah Said. Thank you very much, Mr. Said, for joining us here on the programme. Really good to see you.
Thank you, Yalda.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza in particular has been described by the UK ambassador to the UN as harrowing, by the UN Secretary General as catastrophic. I mean, it has been devastating watching what's been unfolding in the region.
Absolutely. This is a conflict, obviously, that's been raging now for a year. We've seen the destruction in Gaza of over 40,000 people killed. 1.9 million, almost the entire population of Gaza, have been displaced. The UN has warned multiple times about the potential famine in the area. We've seen the scenes on our screens almost on a daily basis. And of course, now in Lebanon, 1 million people that have also been displaced, searching for shelter, living in the open spaces, also struggling for food, water and medical care. So it's absolutely shocking in terms of the humanitarian needs. And that's why we've launched the DEC appeal today.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about the appeal and where in particular it will be focusing on.
Yeah. So the Disasters Emergency Committee brings together the 15 leading humanitarian organisations, and they have been working with trusted local partners in Gaza and now in Lebanon and also in the West Bank to reach people with food, water and medicines. They have been working there for decades. Of course, over the last year, they have been surging their activities. Over £70 million has already been spent in Gaza. Those funds have run out. We are now asking people to keep the pipeline continuing for humanitarian assistance. The scale is unimaginable, and that's why we're asking the British public, who are incredibly generous when it comes to humanitarian crises like these, to donate what they can.
We have been speaking to Israeli officials off the back of the discussions at the UN yesterday, and there are concerns that for the first few weeks of the month of October, aid hasn't actually, it's basically non-existent, the amount of aid that has arrived into Gaza. How will you ensure that the aid does get in to where it needs to get in?
So, as I mentioned earlier, we're working with the 15 leading humanitarian charities, the UK-based ones, and their partners, their local trusted partners on the ground. Aid is a challenge to get through. That is not a secret. People have been seeing that on their screens. But these charities are still able to get through land routes, but also through commercial products that are getting in to ensure that they're targeting the most vulnerable. But we also have to make sure that we're planning that the pipeline for humanitarian aid continues. Of course, there are people in southern Gaza, there are people in Lebanon, where there is less restrictions in terms of aid getting in. What is needed right now is funds to ensure that we're able to supply as much aid as possible.
And what is it that people, it feels like they need absolutely everything. As you say, we're seeing everything from people with disabilities, but also those who have been injured. And obviously the hospitals we've seen as well are virtually, not functioning. What is it that people need most in Gaza and the West Bank at the moment?
Well, certainly in Gaza and in Lebanon, it is the basics, as you said, food, water and shelter. And of course, medical support and support to medics. The hospitals and the clinics are running out, or indeed the whole system has collapsed. So these are the kind of support that we're providing. But also not forgetting, the most vulnerable are often the children and women and the elderly. The trauma that people have been suffered over this intense conflict that has obviously devastated the whole of the Middle East, or at least those countries, is just unbelievable. And to be able to provide trauma care and support to those children, to try to overcome the suffering that is as important. That mental and physical support is as important as the food and the water and the shelter.
What we're also hearing about the situation in Gaza is, of course, because it is lawless and people are desperate, aid is being taken away by different groups. Is this something that is of concern for you as well? Because the Israelis I speak to say that Hamas is taking all the aid, and that is one of the reasons why they're not able to get aid to the most needy.
What we actually found is that wherever there's often a humanitarian setting, in Gaza and Lebanon is no exception, is that people actually rally around and support each other. They share their food, they share the shelter. That's where humanity actually comes out. Of course, there are desperate people and they want to be able to feed their children or look after their children, and occasionally things get out of hand. But that is the exception, not the rule. The rule is that people are very generous to each other and they support each other. And often, it's those people who are impacted on the ground that are the first responders and the ones to help and support each other.
In fact, I just got back from Lebanon and I saw something very similar, the sense of community when
Absolutely.
So many people were desperate, but they were rallying around. And of course, this isn't just about, obviously, the devastation we're seeing in Gaza, the situation in the West Bank, but you mentioned Lebanon as well, which is where the appeal is going to be focused on.
Yes, so the appeal and is now focusing on Gaza, Lebanon, and to some extent the West Bank. We've been assessing, obviously, as well as the UN and others, the severe needs, humanitarian needs, unmet humanitarian needs. And I must stress here about the unmet needs. These are people that are going without, potential famine, waterborne diseases, lack of medical assistance, the very basics. That's why this appeal is focused on Gaza and Lebanon right now. And we would urge people, please go onto our website, dec.org.uk, and donate whatever you can. The UK government have also contributed up to £10 million in aid match. That means for each pound a member of the public gives, the UK government will match that, which means their donations will go even further.
Saeed, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme, telling us more about that DEC appeal for the most desperate in Gaza and, of course, in Lebanon as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, that's it for the programme tonight. Good night from me and the team. Thank you so much.